Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the FIDIC COVID-19 webinar. This is the 11th in the series that we are pursuing, and I'm really delighted to invite you to join me with excellent speakers all over the world. As you know, for those who've been following the webinar in the past, we've covered issues about how the member associations are dealing with the crisis. We went on to talk about force majeure, as how this applies to contracts which are being frustrated. We talked about joint venture relationship and the challenges that it face. We looked at the issue about consultancy and engineering, what the implication of the COVID-19 has been on them. We talked about insurance and the risk that goes with that. We discussed the issue about alternative dispute resolution. And we also look at the issue about the impact of digital world as more and more people have been working from home and what's the implication, how they've been coping with that. Subsequent to that, we look at the issue about people, the health and safety of people. We also look at the issue about the balance sheet. How are we looking at our business going concern? And finally, we talked about issue about communication. This is the issue of that facing us. As we talked about COVID-19 in different parts of the world, different people are facing it at different time cycle. But one thing that is important and that came through again and again through previous conversation is about how do we communicate the message to the stakeholders. And I define skilled stakeholders at this point in terms of our staff, which is critical, our employers, and investors, our clients, this is actually equally critical. So today I'm delighted once again to have an excellent speaker who will be joining us to talk about the various issues. The session will start with this particular part, which is the 5 minutes introduction for myself. I will then invite the president of FIDIC to give us a word of welcome. Thereafter, each panelist will be given maximum, and I insist maximum of 7 minutes to share with us, and they'll be discussing the subject as we talked about it. Then hopefully we should be able to cover that in an hour's time. Thereafter, I will move on to Q&A session. All the panelists will be given questions to actually address, but also, the participants will be invited at 1 hour's time to open up questions, which I'll pick up from the floor and I'll pass it to the panel. I hope to finish on time about 1:30 Central European time, so that we can actually engage all our people around the world. I'm told this morning that we have over 780 people registered, and I hope we can maintain your enthusiasm throughout the whole conversation. I know you'll be busting for questions, but please hold on to your question until an hour's time when the floor will be open. At this point in time, I want to say that the key message from our point of view is how is our people doing during this difficult time. We've had a lot of bad news in the industry about people losing their life, and we empathize with those families who've lost people, and our condolences go to them wherever they are. But it's also important as the industry open up that we getting back to work, that we do it safely, but we also communicate to our members as best as we can. So at this point in time, I'm going to invite the president of FIDIC, Bill Howard, to take the floor and share thoughts with you. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson, and I will be brief. First of all, I would like to thank Nelson for all of his hard work in putting on these webinars, and particularly the Secretariat staff. Putting on these webinars would be a difficult task under any circumstances. Under the circumstances of working from home and remotely, it's really incredible. And this is the 11th webinar that we have had, and so far they've gone off reasonably well. I also would like to particularly thank our speakers today. There's a number of subject matter experts in the area of communication, which is so critical to our profession. As Nelson said, this is the 11th webinar that we have had, and they've dealt with a variety of subjects, from legal elements to finance to all sorts of areas that affect our business. And every one of them, communication came up, the need to communicate internally and externally, to build relationships, hopefully that are already very good, but the critical need to build those relationships even stronger. Leadership and communication have been mentioned at every one of these webinars, and they're very, very important. And I think a lot of us would acknowledge that as a general broad statement, professional engineers and scientists and people with STEM backgrounds, communication really isn't necessarily our strongest suit. The people with us today, in many ways, have helped us as an organization in communicating, and they really are experts in this field. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from them. So back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill. You probably find that from the list, we've got a lot of good speakers, but I'm going to start off with John Campbell, who is the chair of our director and secretary, and he's joining us for the second time. And John, the floor is yours from Canada.
Well, good morning, Nelson. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to join you. I'm speaking to you from beautiful Monday morning from Ottawa, Canada, which is part of the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin First Nation. And if there are any Canadians that got up early, a happy Canada Day from coast to coast. Communication's very important. It's in fact, from an association perspective, associations essentially exist to communicate to different audiences, to put forward the goals of an association, whether it's through advocacy, whether it's disseminating information, whether it's educating or providing resources. These are all different aspects of communication. And we are in a unique time right now with the COVID-19 crisis. And across the globe, we're finding ourselves in varying situations. Many countries are starting to emerge at various stages of reopening the economy. Other countries are in varying degrees of lockdown and social distancing. But through all this, the fundamentals of association communication and corporate communications, for that matter, remain unchanged. If you want to be effective in communication and you want to cut through the clutter, and with a crisis, there is a lot of clutter and there's a lot of white noise. And I think all of us found when this crisis sort of took hold about 60 plus days ago, that social media just exploded, communications exploded. And there's a lot of communication fatigue that we're challenged by. And and that happens under the best of circumstances. And a number of years ago, our association did a communications audit, and we interviewed our members, our stakeholders, trying to get some feedback how we might communicate effectively, how we might cut through the noise, how we get the right information to the right people. And there's a lot of useful recommendations, and I'll share some of them with you this morning. But the real takeaway were the top two conclusions. They told us in no uncertain terms, we need to communicate with them more, and two, we had to stop sending them so much stuff. And there's the dilemma of modern communications. So it should tie, regardless of these extraordinary times, it should all tie back to your strategic plan and to your operational policies. These do not change. And we're all competing for bandwidth. And it's very important that we go right back to, why does our association exist? What is our raison d'etre? And in most cases, it's something along the lines of making our members more successful, whether it's through advocacy, resources, and others. And that involves both our external and our internal audiences. It's very important to know why you're communicating, who you need to communicate to, and you have to be very disciplined about what you're communicating. One of the big challenges early in this crisis was the temptation to get communications out every time there was a new development. And then you become part of the issue with all the white noise, the excessive communications. And of course, Canada, along with many countries, have legislation around spam and email, where you have to offer unsubscribe. And you can pretty much count, when you do a blanket mass email, you're going to get some unsubscribe. So if you're doing this 3 or 4 times a week, you're just going to erode your own communication space. So you have to be very judicious about what you're sending, when you're sending, who you're sending it to, and the basic principle, it's got to be what's in it for them. There has to be a compelling reason for you to get a message out there. Now, in a crisis like this, there's many things. One is the resources. Many of our governments are introducing programs to support business. Many of our governments are considering stimulus programs, many of them built upon infrastructure investment and other client markets that our members work in. It's important we disseminate that information out. Some of it is about our advocacy on behalf of our members. One of the big mistakes in advocacy is if you don't tell your members about it. It's not enough to simply be successful at advocating for your members. Your members have to see you being successful at advocating. So these are the things that are going on in the background. Plus there's training like this, opportunities. And credit to Nelson and his team at FIDIC. You know, these are great resources to share. And by being able to sort of piggyback on this, we don't have to barrage people with challenging against ourselves. So these are very important principles about the discipline. So we have to ask ourselves, is what we're saying relevant to our audience? There's a lot of groups sending out information. If there's already groups sending out the same information, we can simply steer our members there. We need to focus on the things that only if we weren't talking about them, who else would be? That's the void we have to look to fill. And how frequently do we need to say it? Typically, with the amount of emails that are flying around these days, the social media posts and everything, it's good, if much as it's practical, we should try to stay to a regular schedule. We're trying to exercise discipline with our usual newsletter. If it's not urgent, if it's not something, if it's simply an update or we're directing them to other resources, then we simply try to get onto our regular communications that are expected. What you want to do is resist the temptation to send out communications, whether it's through social media, whether it's through email. You want to resist doing it every time something pops up, unless it's extremely important. What you do not want to become is your national newscast 3 days later. Otherwise, you become part of that white noise. So that's all about picking your spots, distinguishing yourself, and segregating your audience as much as you can. Our external stakeholders want to know certain things. There are certain things we want our external stakeholders to know. There are things that we want our member firms to know, things that we need to, information we need to get out there. And of course, do not underestimate the importance of staff communications in these important times. Many of our member organizations and our firms certainly have large groups. Many of us are working remotely. It's a change of pace. We need to be transparent. We need to be reassuring. We need to be empathetic. They need to know what's happening. And that's important because we need to work fluidly as teams. And the fact that we're able to put this together, and Nelson, you've been putting these webinars together plus everything else you're doing on a fairly regular basis. And that's, you can't do that unless you have the team continuing to work together. Before I pass it on, just to a few other thoughts. We got to make sure, as engineers in particular, we got to speak plainly. We got to speak clearly in terms of people understand, especially with external audiences. We are probably the only profession that would actually call a safety feature a kill switch. You know, we need to, we need to speak in terms that people receive. So we need to be clear. We need to be positive. We need to be transparent. Absolutely, people, we need to give them the good news and the bad news. But one observation through life is that bad news has a terrible shelf life. People will forgive you if the good news comes late. You got to get the bad news out there first so people can make informed decisions, because that's what our members, we're essentially business associations. We're not engineering associations per se. We're not professional associations per se. We're actually more analogous to a chamber of commerce. We represent businesses who's happen to offer engineering services, and they need to be able to make informed business decisions. And finally, I would just suggest that it's in our messaging, don't make it all about us. The one great thing about representing consulting engineering firms is we're usually on the side of angels. We add value to society. The Conference Board of Canada recently did a survey after the last, well, not recently, after the last recession, circa about 2009, where there was a lot of stimulus measures undertaken by the Canadian government. One of the things they concluded is that of all the stimulus measures, infrastructure by far and away was the most effective. In fact, they calculated for every dollar that was invested in infrastructure, it added $1.20 to the GDP. So it's not just about getting consulting engineers back to work. It's about enabling us to maintain our capacity so that we can strengthen the economy, that we can put money into the economy, we can build resilience into the economy that will help us weather further downturns. We work on things like sanitation and transportation and access to markets. We enhance the social, the economic, and environmental quality of life. So we've got a great message, and we shouldn't be apologetic about that either. So there's we have a big contribution to make as an industry. We need to tell the external audiences that. We need to be very careful with our own members that we don't barrage them with white noise, and we need to make sure we keep our own employees engaged. So look forward to engaging with the rest of my colleagues a little later. Thank you, Nelson.
John, thank you very much for the way you've started the issue. I like the point you raised at the beginning where you said people want to communicate, but yet they don't want you to send too much emails. But the key point you talked about, your message has to be when, who, where, and what. And I also like the idea that it's not just about, what we are talking to our members about, but it's about what we contribute to society. At this point in time, I know that we have quite a lot of people. I'm going to invite Henrik Garver, to come in from Danish Association. Henrik, I want you to give a perspective on the subject as Managing Director of the Danish Association and also somebody heavily involved with the European Association. Henrik, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, and I hope everyone can hear me. John, you gave a very good introduction to some of the key issues that we work on. Communications is really the crucial key, not only during this crisis, but in general when we work as associations. And then I think another thing right now is that speed is of essence, because we need to come out with the message at the right time, but also we want to avoid the white noise. So I mean, that is really a delicate balance that requires you as an association, as a company, as an individual, to know your audience and know your different audiences who are you communicating with. I'll give an example. When we had in Denmark, we had a national lockdown in early March, and some of the key issues there was communicating with member firms, but not only member firms, but actually also the management teams of member firms, because they were all interested in knowing what are all the other companies doing, how are they handling remote workplaces. Most of them had that in place more or less, but also are they laying off staff, how are we handling holidays, extra time, are you allowed to go negative into extra time? All this stuff that really were relevant for management to know, but that you didn't necessarily want everybody in your membership companies to know. So I mean, that was sort of one group of one target group of to communicate to and to give valuable information. Another group was then member firms in general. How do we see the market developing? So we made a few quick surveys, both for Denmark, but actually also at a European level, to take the temperature right at the moment. So in March and again in April, has the market come to a complete halt? Are there different sectors that are going up and down, or is everything going down at the same time, and so on? So this sort of genuine information that the companies could use to maybe look at their pipeline potentially, and also see what is the general market trends, or some of the communication going out to member firms. But the good thing about doing these quick surveys was also that it's information that we can use for some of the very important guys for us as associations, the politicians and the national decision makers, because we were then able to give them a look at the project pipeline for our industry. And once the crisis got in control, and politicians then went to look not only at the health issue, but also at the economic and financial situation, they wanted to know, how do we restart the economy? What are we going to do? And communicating there, it's crucial to do two things. One is to tell that our industry is really the key to recovery. If you look at major infrastructure projects, if you look at green development, if you look at handling climate change, it all starts in the consultancy and engineering industry. I mean, that's one part of the communication. The other part is then to actually acknowledge that if you look at other industries, at least for Northern Europe, but I would almost say this probably goes almost worldwide. If you look at other industries, say the aviation industry, the airports, the tourism, and so on, they are harder hit. So acknowledge that some industries are actually harder hit than we are as an industry, but also, while acknowledging this, showing that we are really the key to the recovery. So it may be that aviation is harder hit, and of course you need to look into that. But if you want to restart the economy as such, you still need to look at infrastructure investments. You still need to look at climate change. You might actually, as a country, take this as an opportunity to reduce carbon emissions and so on. So actually use it as a way to restart a different sort of a more green economy. So that's another crucial communication area. Then a third area that we, particularly in the start of the crisis, but still actually at a continuous basis, is working with, are some of the stakeholders that we have. And one of those groups is actually the clients to our member firms. Because how do you communicate as an individual consultancy and engineering firm? It might be difficult to communicate to your clients that, do you have something else in pipeline and so on. Of course, that's possible, and you can do it with your good clients in order also to make your business pipeline more visible. But when we went in as an association, we could have a different level of dialogue, and a dialogue where we also connected, particularly for the public clients, their point of views with the politicians. So we were sort of the intermediary in that level of communication also. Say rail authorities or road authorities or public building authorities actually wanting to start up different kinds of projects. We could be the intermediate there, but also tell them it's crucial that you move payments forward because we have a liquidity issue to work on. So getting this balance right was important. But what all this sums up to is then that we have sort of broadband communication going out to all member firms, going out to the public in general when we had different surveys. But really we did a lot of more narrow stakeholder communications with individual politicians, with the government, with public clients that did not go out into public. But then we, of course, in our member communications, the point that John made quite clear for members only that we have had this in our weekly newsletter. We've had this communications with some of the stakeholders that are of interest to you. But it is really finding this this crucial balance. Just to stick with the time, but just also go to Europe. Europe has been hit in very different ways. I think some of the crucial things has been that part of Europe has been completely locked down, building sites locked down, everything. Other parts of Europe have had a lockdown, but certain industries have been allowed to continue. And when we look at the phase of recovery now, we see that the countries that were slightly open are now having an easier time opening up even more, whereas getting back from a complete lockdown just seems to be very, very difficult. Another issue is for Europe, the border openings. How can we work internationally if we cannot travel? That was one of the issues that we had with member firms. Companies doing international work, but not being able to go out to the projects, very, very difficult. And that's some of the stuff that we communicate also to politicians particularly. That's what I'll meet later on today with politicians to discuss also. So just a lot of areas there that we work on. But I mean, it's yeah, that's the gist of it. Communication is crucial. Our industry is the key to recovery.
Okay, Thank you very much, Henrik. I think I like your punch word. Communication is critical and our industry is key to recovery. But you did talk about your internal and external. You build on what John talked about, using our communication as a means to influence. You didn't use the word thought leadership, but you were actually implying that we can get to policymaker to help them to influence decision by using the right communication. So thank you very much. I'm gonna invite, Sara Lipscombe from Costain Group, who have both consulting and contracting, but their difference is actually their PLC. So there will be a different angle in how they communicate, both internal and external, because this is quite important, that the role of the stakeholder is also critically important. So Sara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson. So hello, everyone. And I want to start with 4 words, actually, which I have used to guide my thoughts through this whole situation. And they're 4 words that we like in engineering, but they don't necessarily all sit together. So one is structure, routine, agile, and innovation. And let me come on to explain those. So at the start, there's no doubt that having a really good, well thought through crisis management plan and crisis communications plan that people understand, with people who understand the roles that they're going to play, there's no doubt that that helps you maintain order, focus and clarity out of what can feel like a chaotic situation when you really aren't in control of the external environment. And sort of the gurus of crisis management talk about routine and structure. And I think one of the things that we did quite early at Costain was recognize that we have a workforce that likes order and structure. And so we sort of categorized phases of COVID as much as we could. We recognized there was a respond phase that was going into lockdown, which was pretty binary. And that was the phase where we had more questions than we had answers, and we were running fast to stand still. Then we knew there was going to be a recovery stage, a point at which you sort of got into a steady state, where it was by no means normal, but you were operating and you were being able to take a little bit more time, and you had a little bit of more information from which to make your decisions. And then in normal crisis management, you go back into business as usual. But as we all know, there is nothing normal about this. And so we're all now beginning to think what the new normal looks like. And the first thing we did at Costain was consider our purpose. Our purpose as an organization is improving people's lives. And we were really clear that we had to continue to do that through this terrible situation. And we also wanted to define our own North Star, which was a simple phrase that would guide every decision that we took at the beginning of the lockdown, through the recovery, and as we come out into what we call our Thrive mode. And we defined our North Star as doing the right thing, very simple language there, doing the right thing by society, our people, our clients, and safeguarding the business. And that little phrase over the last 8 weeks or so really has been the thing that has kept us true and focused about everything that we did. And we also knew from the outset that we would be dealing with stakeholders who were anxious, maybe frightened, maybe on their own, dealing with homeschooling, worrying about what this situation would mean for them, their livelihoods, their families, their friends, their jobs. And we recognized that we had to drop the corporate persona pretty quickly. And we had to communicate with integrity, that we had to communicate in an authentic way and in a very human way. And that was a bit counterintuitive to us because we're a corporate PLC and we've been quite formal in our communication. But we recognized we had to drop that and become a bit more personal. And we also recognized that there were going to be 2 sorts of communication for us. There was going to be the public service type communication, the things we needed to tell our staff we needed them to do, the things we wanted them to do to keep themselves safe, the communications we were going to have with our clients about our operations and our business continuity. But then there were the other communications, which was about keeping people engaged, motivated, safe and well for the long haul. And we recognized that they would be slightly different because we did have to communicate tough news. We put about 300 people on the government's furlough scheme, the job retention scheme in the UK. And we also knew that that was going to be tough. And so we had to communicate some very difficult news very early on. And we also put through salary reductions for most of our staff. So, you know, we recognise that, you know, it couldn't all be positive. I think as John said earlier, you know, you have to get the bad news out there in a very straightforward manner very quickly. But what we did was we captured the radio station. I think it's really important when you're running communications in a situation like this that you have to define your stakeholder groups, and you need to be really clear what you need to communicate with people, when you need to communicate with them, but also how. And certainly for our employees, we decided that we needed a single source of truth. To be fair, we started out replaying government guidelines, and we recognized that they were changing so quickly, we couldn't keep rewriting them. So we created a portal on our intranet, which was the place to go. And we created links to all the external sources of information so that we didn't have to keep rewriting them. But we also filled that portal with all sorts of practical guidelines, help tips for our line managers, and everything right down to virtual yoga classes to keep our people fit and active. And actually the stats have shown that that's really well received. We still get about sort of 1,200-1,300 people visiting that site on a weekly basis. And we've got a workforce of about 3,500, many of whom are out on site. So typically we don't get those sort of volumes onto our intranet, but actually that single source of truth, capturing the radio station, was really good, but also removing information. Take the old stuff off, don't let it become a monster. We've lived in the virtual world like many of us. You know, we're pushing Microsoft Teams technology to the fore, and actually we are now even broadcasting regularly to our entire workforce. Teams can broadcast to 10,000 people. And what that's taught us is agility. You know, in peacetime, we probably would have thought about that for a few months. We would have tested it to destruction, and any little wobble on the network, and we would have decided not to do it. But actually, we are in the middle of an equity raise at the moment, and we really had an urgent need a week or so ago to communicate with all our staff about COVID and an update on our equity raise. And our IT department came to us with about 4 days notice, and they said, we can do this, we can make it work. And we said, well, let's go for it. And actually, we did lose our CFO for a few minutes. His internet went down. But if anything, that gave it more credibility. And people said, you know, it was real, it was authentic, and it wasn't overly polished, and it wasn't overly stage managed, which is what, quite frankly, you know, we've tended to do with our communications in the past. And so that's where the innovate word comes in. You know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It just has to be functional, and it has to be work, and it has to be real. So what else did we do? We recognized we were putting an awful lot of pressure on our line managers to communicate. And I think somebody else said a little bit earlier, you know, it's not always a natural state for us in our sorts of organizations. So what my team did, being quite a small team, we recognized that we were going to be under siege and we would have more demands on our time than we had people. So we set up a daily communication surgery, and that was one of the best things that we could have done. People knew that at 11 o'clock every day, they could get on a live Teams call, my team would be there, and people could share their concerns, their anxieties, their best practice, ask for help and advice. And it also worked as a really good sounding board for us, because, you know, we'd put some comms out, or we might say, we're thinking about doing something, how will it land? And we got an instant feedback, and actually everyone said to us, please continue doing that. Maybe not every day, we've dropped it down to a couple of times a week, but that's something that we'll continue. And we also used our social media sites. We set up a hangout group on Facebook for our staff who've been furloughed, because we thought it was really important for them to be able to create their own community of well-being and sort of collegiate feedback during this time. So I've talked quite a lot about internal communication, but we're a PLC, so we have to think externally. We have to think about communication with our clients and with our investors. And that was a bit of a tricky one for us, because we knew from the early days that we were still operating. The UK government has said that the construction industry must still operate, and we were pretty much operating from day one. We had our people on our sites, and we worked out how we could do that safely. Safety is absolute paramount for us, going back to our purpose and our North Star. But we worked out how we could keep people working. And we also knew that working in our sector, you know, working on critical infrastructure, we were playing a really vital part to keep the nation moving through the highways and the railways, to keep the water flowing, and to keep the nation powered up. But we also created a single source of truth on our website, because we recognized that our clients might need one single place to go. And so we put all of our COVID-related services, we repackaged our services and put those on a hub on our website so that our clients and potential clients could access those quickly. But actually, external communication proved a bit of a dilemma for us because we were working, but the UK public had its own view about what key workers and who key workers were. And actually, in the early days of this, adopted a bit of a vigilante approach by calling out people who they didn't think should be working. And we got quite a lot of negativity towards our staff who were carrying out vital work on construction sites. And so we did everything from putting up posters at sites saying that, you know, these were key workers carrying out vital work. We made sure we gave people letters so that they could take a letter and show it to anyone if they were challenged. But we also took quite a lot of heat on our social media, and we actually closed our social media down. We didn't close it down, we just stopped communicating for a few weeks until it went a bit quiet. And now gradually we're beginning to show the value, because as we all know, we need to demonstrate to our shareholders that we're open for business. We need to demonstrate confidence to our staff that we're open for business. We're clearly, you know, not fully operational, but we are, you know, doing very well in very difficult circumstances. And actually, we do need to demonstrate the value that an infrastructure company like ours and like all of our organisations are adding to the economy of our countries. And so that kind of brings me to my final point, really, which is the new business as normal, and how do we continue to operate? How do we continue to win work, to influence our stakeholders, to keep operational and safe for the long haul? And actually, what we're doing is capturing the learning. We've learned an awful lot of really positive things over the last few weeks. We've learned how we can move the majority of our workforce to remote working. We've learned how to be more agile. We've learned how to do things quickly. And we've learned perhaps how to be a bit more human and a bit more authentic through our communications. And we've learned that it doesn't have to be perfect, which is what us comms people try to do half of the time. So, you know, we're taking on board all that feedback now. We're thinking about the good things and what could have gone better. And we're making sure that we don't go back to the old ways. And we're putting that into the melting pot now as we start to think of all the communications activities that we now need to reverse and come out of this a bit more slowly, whereas we went into this with a hard stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. I mean, I'm really impressed with the way you've actually started with your 4-point: structure, routine, agile, and innovation, which seems quite appropriate. And the way you close out that, you know, whatever you've done over the period of this COVID, the question is, how do we get ready for the future? So lesson learned. And some of the issues that will take a long time to actually put into implementation, you breaking the innovation barrier. That is fantastic. I also take your point that even though when there's bad news, get it out there and deal with upfront. So on that note, I'm really going to invite Chris Campbell from South Africa to share his experience with us. Chris, the floor is yours. Thank you. Can you unmute Chris, please?
Thank you, Nelson, and good morning to all participating this morning. So I'd like to share some of our South African experiences, but I want to start as an association, because essentially that's what we are, Consulting Engineers South Africa. And I need, you know, looking at what was happening in the big wide world, I'm sort of proud to say that we had taken a risk-based decision as a management team in my office, even before our government had called for a national lockdown. So whereas our lockdown started by about 19th of March officially, around about the 16th, realizing the imminent threat and looking at, you know, just caring for my staff and the people who ordinarily would come into our office, because we do a lot of training, so there's a lot of contact and huge risks that existed. I had an emergency meeting with everybody in the office, and firstly gave them the reassurance that this was by no means an action of displacement. Nobody needed to worry at that point in time that their jobs were under threat. because immediately when you can't quite explain what the context is and why you're taking this radical and drastic action, people get confused. And I took the time to illustrate why it was necessary for us to adopt the approach that we did. I think the fortunate thing that we had on our side, and I want to take 2 steps back. We have as our strategic objectives as an organization, I'll read them to you, and it's so coincidental that this COVID crisis fell squarely into what we were doing. One of our goals is proactive, targeted, effective, and constructive engagement with all relevant stakeholders. And then one of our other goals was deliver value add to members and stakeholders. So having that as a base, and then having to face a unprecedented situation such as we were then faced with. Effectively on the 19th, the country went into lockdown. Companies, construction companies, for the most part, couldn't operate. We did have our mining sector continue at about 20%, and maintenance activities to ensure water provisioning, power supply, those kept at work. And I must say, we have many heroes in this situation. I think the most unsung heroes that we do need to acknowledge are the people who were exposed not only in the medical environment, but with us having to go and buy supplies, at the regular stores, because not all of them are equipped with the technology that you walk in and you swipe without making any contact. So indeed, those are heroes that one would like to acknowledge. So we realized that very quickly, we're going to have to come up with a plan. We had nowhere had we a disaster type of a communication strategy or plan in place. We then spent a few days over the weekend when everything shut down, and so when we closed shop, as an industry and as a collective, that was the 19th. By about the 23rd, we had to start something. And we saw a myriad of mails coming through and a myriad of advisory pieces and so on. And we had to ask ourselves, so do we want to do all of this all over again? Or should we not be looking at what everyone is doing and then selectively share those pieces so that we can indeed achieve the balance, which I think John alluded to earlier, is communicate, but not communicate to death, because people get pretty much annoyed. So we started with the strategy of communicating with our member companies, and we would ideally do that through the CEO and a couple of his key executives. And we realized that actually we need to give the CEO the opportunity to crystallize and then have that discussions internally with the information, rather than it arriving simultaneously with several people. So we toned that down, targeted the CEO, but we also realized that, hey, you know what, let's not make the poor person the postman, because his inbox is probably being clogged with a whole lot of other communications as well. And let's be mindful of that. So what we did was we adopted a dual strategy, in fact, a 3-pronged strategy, because we found that sometimes with the communications going out to so many people, they disappear into the ether. Some get it, it ends up in junk mail, it goes into spam, and people then, they tend to miss out. So our first part of our strategy was the direct, the email, and we then also created a bulletin board on our website. And every communication that had been shared, including, and thanks to FIDIC, every one of these webinar invitations and any other sensible bits of information that could help our member companies, either having to deal with their own financial situations, dealing with employees who were either being retrenched, although we try to discourage that as best as possible, but people on reduced hours earn less, sharing some of the systems and processes that government had made available to provide that kind of top-up assistance to struggling companies and struggling employees. And so all of this was on these two channels, but we also realized, but hold on, if we pull back and we don't send information, you can't honestly expect the recipient to be sitting in front of their computer or to be, I call it email gazing all day long. So, you know, what we do, we would periodically, when we put a post on our COVID bulletin board, we wouldn't send that communication to the CEO. We'd post it on the bulletin board and we'd drop him an SMS and say, you know, remember to check your COVID bulletin board. And, you know, I believe that strategy worked very well. We have found feedback from companies really being appreciative. And in fact, as that part of our communication plan also involved us as an organization having engagements with other entities. And I think unique to South Africa, we became part of a 35 organizations, different organizations in the sector nationally, construction companies, consultants, suppliers, the full value chain, and formulated proposals to government on how you could get the sector back to work safely. What are the health and safety protocols that we were advocating for? Because we realized we best know our sector and our processes. We know them better than government decision makers. And so let's help the decision-making process. That all happened. And we are, you know, we were at the total lockdown at level 5. We are down to a level 4, where many companies in the construction sector, consulting companies, and contractors have been able to get back to site. Materials are being made available, but all of them have to comply with a very strict health and safety screening regime so that you make sure that your workforce are coming to work healthy, and you know, that continues. We are mindful of the fact that you've got this invidious balance between economic stimulus and getting your economy back, but protecting the health and safety and the well-being of the people, just everybody in the country. And you know, unfortunately, when we talk economy, South Africa also faced a really ill-timed investment downgrading, which certainly exacerbates the predicament we are in terms of economy. Okay. And a third part of this, so we call it triage, is the fact that we also have other underlying health conditions, which turns the debate into not only economy versus COVID-19 threat, but it's the other elements of health and well-being that are being neglected. You know.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for that. You know, I'm just mindful of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Chris, for giving us that explicit internal perspective on CESA. I did, you know, like the word that it was a risk-based strategy, but actually saying, you know, the whole idea using direct communication with CEO, bulletin combined with SMS, you must be very privileged to have all the contact details of your people, and also using a triage approach. I think that is excellent. Now I was going to try and bring in Gina London, who is a public speaker and a communication expert. and a guru in the market. Before I bring Andy Walker in. So I'm going to invite Gina to give us her perspective from outsider looking inside and giving us ideas as to, what she would have looked at and how best should have dealt with the issue of COVID-19. Gina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelson, and thank you, Bill, and thank you to everyone who's on Zoom right now listening around the world. I am really grateful for this opportunity because I do have a fortunate position in some ways that I've been able to, as a consultant in communications, work with a lot of different team leaders and executives around the world right now in a variety of industries. And of course, communications is integral to any industry. And so as I was listening earlier to John talking about the importance of judicious communications, not over communications, and Henrik talking about how important it is to think about the other people that might be having a harder time when you're out maybe lobbying or talking to politicians for different things, and making sure you put that into that position. And Sara just knocked it out of the park talking about keeping it real and thinking about what's the vision or the North Star for a team to get aligned around. And then Chris, thank you so much for talking about the ability to segment out which platform or how you might want to be talking to someone, so you're not inundating people, back to John's point, with an abundance of emails. One of my clients, I do a lot of work in the tech area around Salesforce and Facebook, for example, and those teams were talking about their number of emails were increased by 40 to 45% over the last 2 months through this shutdown. And nobody's got time to go through and triage all of those and figure out which is the most important. And so this gets to, I hope, a little bit of that lesson learned that Sara was talking about too, is what happens during a crisis as a leader, and we're all leaders. If you impact a person, you're a leader. What happens in a crisis is it doesn't make you, it reveals you. And so if your organization doesn't have strong core values that everybody can articulate, it's time to get that solid. And the great thing about being a leader is that you can acknowledge it, you can continue to grow, and so you can change and layer on some of these things. And so another thing about crises, while we all talk about this unprecedented crisis we're going through right now, we also have to understand that as a leader, we're probably going to have some form of a crisis every couple of days, because a crisis by definition really is an unexpected occurrence that prompts or encourages or needs a leader to respond with consequences to those responses. And what's interesting is, in that definition, and I've worked on the General Motors ignition switch lawsuit in the United States years ago. When I was a reporter for CNN, I covered at Ground Zero the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York. And what's interesting about a crisis is this undeterminate or indeterminate amount of time of duration. So some crises might come and go, but some crises may go on. And for even the countries that are somewhat emerging right now, there still is, as Sara touched on, there still is this question of what's it going to look like afterwards. And so what I think I've learned, or what I'm seeing from the various teams that I'm supporting around the world right now, is that the crisis doesn't make you, it reveals you. And so one of the things it's revealing is that leaders who can communicate purposefully with an intention and with a very outlined, and back to the point about structure, a very outlined way to make sure that they are delivering in a way that is connecting with that specific audience, making sure that they have an intent or a goal for the particular information that they're giving that's very clear and understood by all, and that the message that they're delivering is short, succinct, targeted. John, I think, clicked on the idea of what's in it for them every single time. And I put this together in 3 little letters that I hope going forward is maybe methodology that we can all use for any communication event. And that's just simply AIM, A-I-M. And it's put in those letters in that order for a reason, because in the first position, the A stands for audience. And Henrik was talking about how when you go to a politician and you are talking about what's happening with your architectures or your engineers or your infrastructure projects, but you also are very cognizant that the airline industry is struggling too, and you don't want to forget that. To be able to target your message, putting the audience in that first position will help you be able to be more flexible and agile with what that message is. And again, if you're going internal, what are the hopes, dreams, and fears of your audience? And Sara talking about having a dedicated portal just for the furloughed employees, that shows such care and it demonstrates their core values that those furloughed employees, the loyalty there remains, I imagine, so strong throughout this. And the other organizations around the world, if you've got external targets and you want to make sure that you're thinking about and valuing them, putting a quick aim strategy in place can help you do that. The I then, A is for audience, I then, I mentioned this word before, is intent. What's the goal of your communication? Is it, as Sara and others were talking about, is it, and Chris was talking about, is it disseminating the COVID information right away? Okay, well, what's the intent of that? If the intent is not to overburden, or the intent is to get the real salient point out there, then maybe we need to delineate where, like Sara was saying, we have links going on as opposed to what's specific for our industry. And once I was working with a group of executives from the Absolute Vodka team, so nothing to do with, might have something to do with engineering after a long day of work, but I was in Stockholm last year and they had a big change, organizational change effort that they were going to roll out. And I had 5 of their C-level execs in the room and I said, what's the intent for this particular event or this meeting or this communique? And each one of them, when they went around the room, had a variation on that idea. And so when you think about getting that in sync, it can make a big difference. And the last point then is your message. How you can make that, as John said, lay terms, especially if it's an external audience, thoughtful, as Sara was underscoring. And then, as Chris said, make sure it's put out on a platform that people can receive it. So I hope going forward, we can capture the things that have made us more human and purposeful throughout this and codify that and put on a strategy that continues it for the future.
Gina, thank you very much for that insightful way of looking at it. I like the word aim. You know, what is the audience? What is the intent? And what is the message? And how do you get that message across to the right audience, right platform? Thank you very much, Gina, on that. I'm going to invite Andy Walker, Editor, Infrastructure, Intelligence and Advice to the FIDIC. Andy, you are a journalist, an advisor and a communicator. You see a lot of politicians, you get involved with all sorts of activities across the world. And I just wonder whether you can just give us a summation of where we are on that. Andy, the floor is yours. Thank you. You unmute, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, the first most important thing is to understand the technology that you're actually using and don't mute yourself when you start speaking. Thanks for inviting me to speak today and good day to everyone around the world. And thanks for those who've had to get up early to take part. I think it's really interesting. A number of speakers have mentioned the white noise and it made me look at my email inbox or the various email inboxes that I've got. And I think this morning alone, I've got more than 200 emails in my inbox. Now, a number of those are actually press releases from organizations who are not deliberately adding to the white noise. They're actually trying to get their message across. And, you know, some of that information is actually very, very interesting. And, you know, we will actually report on that going forward. But I think all the speakers who've mentioned the need to be focused are absolutely spot on, actually. But there is actually a lot to talk about at the present time, notwithstanding the unprecedented nature of the crisis that we're all currently living. And some of us fortunate to be, by fortune, I mean, they haven't been laid off in terms of working through as well. You know, because I think it is important to make the point that it is an unprecedented crisis, because that unprecedented nature is not only affecting industries like our own, it's also affecting journalists and those who report on it as well. And when you have a situation when on national news programs, you have people broadcasting effectively from their front rooms And in some cases, you can see everything behind them and all that kind of stuff. We really are in unprecedented times. And I think it's really been interesting listening to people talk about this informal nature, getting to grips with informal communications and being less corporate, because I think more and more now people are actually responding to that and responding to those organizations and companies that are able to do that, not in a stilted, manufactured way, but in a genuine way of really talking about, you know, the fact that, you know, these are unprecedented times and that we do empathize with what's going on. And my mind goes back to a report that I saw the other day. I can't remember the channel that it was on, but basically someone was speaking and you saw the kettle boiling in the background. Maybe a good idea to make sure that's not going on. But it made me bond with the person who was actually speaking. And I think it's really, really important to actually show that human side, because at the end of the day, as all the speakers have shown here, we are a human industry. This industry doesn't exist, doesn't operate, doesn't work without that human approach. And I think it's really important to actually to display that and to actually understand that. I think there are some opportunities for positive communication in the current crisis. Many news outlets have got a lot less news actually than they normally have in relation to the general news cycle. And there's a lot of interest in what's going on in relation to how our organization's dealing with this whole question of working through this particular crisis. And I think we shouldn't forget that our industry can actually highlight in a very positive way what it's actually doing to keep societies, in many cases, working, to keep the economies on track. Because as we all know, at the end of this crisis, the whole question of how do we refloat economies, how do we make sure that businesses not only get back to work, but also that whole nations are actually in a position to actually revitalize their economies. And we do know that infrastructure is absolutely vital in that process. I think FIDIC has some significant challenges on the communications front at the present time, because being a global organization, it has to collectivize experience based on countries that might be at different stages within the crisis. Sometimes it's easy to forget when you're in your own bubble, if you like, that, well, we are facing the crisis at this particular point in time, when it may be that other countries are actually at a much earlier stage. That creates real challenges, I think, for communication. And I think these webinars that FIDIC has been organising have been massively important in collectivising that whole experience as well, because it enables people to ask questions, to make points, and to, I suppose, come together as a collective, even though we can't meet physically in rooms, even though we don't have that one-to-one, communication. Actually, we do have it through the medium of technology. And despite this or that glitch, by the way, I think the tech sector has really come to the fore in relation to what we've seen in the recent period. And also the sectors like the infrastructure sector that create, if you like, the infrastructure for that tech sector is really, really important as well. So I think we need to highlight that. I just want to finish off on a couple of points because time is pressing and Nelson will keep me to the 7 minutes that we've been allotted. And that is just to say, I think it's important to recognize as an industry the real positives that we actually have in this current crisis, from the point of view of explaining concretely how economies can be brought back to something approaching normality. We know there will not be a new normal, and I want to finish on this point because I think it's really important, and I think it speaks to what we are doing at this present moment in time. Take advantage of digital going forward, because it's crucial, I believe, in how industries and businesses are going to communicate. We knew we were already headed in that direction, but this crisis has shown more than any other that it will potentially change everything. The whole Zoom culture, the whole culture of online communications, I think, is actually in the here and now. And we have a real opportunity to actually show that in the new normal. Nobody knows exactly what the new normal will look like, but I think it's certainly not going to look like it previously used to look like. And that brings opportunities for our sector. And I think I just want to finish on that point, be alive to the opportunities that are there, because they do exist. And there are really, really big opportunities to get a message across.
Thank you very much, Andy. That is a very good way of summing it up. It's interesting as a moderator to listen to all the panelists, because you all seem to somehow embrace each other and bring everybody, together. I like the point that Andy talks about, we are moving into a new normal. I call it a new chapter. And I do pick up the word that we need to embrace digital. I think I heard the phrase, going digital. This is real. It's not only virtual, but it's real. But I also hear Sara talking earlier on about, something, we used to be corporate. We then suddenly realized we really need to get down to people. And we are now learning on the back of that to say, how do we move that forward in the future? Because the whole of corporate idea maybe is not the new world that we need to move on to. But the question, I think the big question is coming through, and there will be a lot of questions coming from the floor. I think Barbara, in a very usual way, will open the question up in the floor. But before we start taking questions, I have a few questions that I really want to put across. And this is not a pre-planned question. This is a question based on what I've heard from you. I'm going to start off with Sara. As a corporate entity where you have to deal with the city, because you did mention that right now you're actually going into equity, issue. As a corporate entity with well-organized structure, did you ever plan for a COVID or such a sort of a pandemic within your strategy? Was that in your strategy at all? Sara?
Thank you, Nelson. Well, we certainly have a well-tried and tested crisis management plan and a business continuity plan, and yes, we did have a pandemic plan as part of that. I think it helped us a little bit in that we had a bit of a structure and we knew how we would start to organize ourselves. So, when we got our exec team into a room, when it became quite clear that this was going to be real, we didn't get into a room and go, what we're going to do. We kind of all knew what our roles were going to be, and we had a bit of a structure. I don't think any organization would have a plan, maybe apart from the health organizations, to deal with a situation quite as extreme as this. You kind of plan to deal with a crisis that might, run for a couple of weeks, and then, you start to recover and you start to get back into some sort of normality. But yes, we did have a crisis management plan, and yes, pandemics was on it.
Well, it's interesting you said that the pandemic was on top of it, because this, from what I understand, this is a one in a lifetime. We hope and pray that none of us have to go through this again. Obviously, having a crisis management, being able to deal that with the complex organization structure is quite interesting. Let me come back across into Gina. Gina, I like your aim. It's very simple, very simplistic. And I just wonder, you look into different sector, and you operate in different sector. You talk about your involvement on 9/11, which must be a major, shake-up issue in one particular country, considering the same place where 9/11 happened is the center of the COVID-19 United States. I mean, is there any lesson we can learn from other sector, bringing into our sector in terms of our response rate? Because the question I've asked again and again is, have we responded adequately enough or not? What's your take?
Have we responded adequately enough as the Federation of Consulting Engineers? I don't know that answer, of course, but I can certainly say, back to, I think John was saying too, and it was underscored by Chris, the idea that leaders are on top of a situation. This is an important aspect of leadership communications, is that they don't know all the answers, they acknowledge that, and they go to the experts, and they don't try to be the expert themselves. And I think we've seen that in the different business organizations. Their response is they were trying to gather themselves together and support their teams. Who are they relying on? How much can they inform in real time? Combined with the governments around the world that were showing different levels of leadership abilities in their communications on, are they depending on the experts? Are they shooting from the hip? Are they unifying people together so that they feel supported. Because the most important thing in leadership communications, of course, is that you're that source of guidance, that your emotions are in check, that you are giving them the support, the teams externally and internally too, that you do have their back and that you're there for them. So I think obviously frequency and speed is part of that, but also transparency and honesty and getting experts in to help make the best decisions and then communicate those decisions.
Thank you very much on that. I'm going to come back to John. John, in your opening bit, you talk about, get your message right and make sure you use that, not only just purely internal and external, but concentrate on how you use it in an advocacy form. Are there particular big message that is coming through at the moment from all as an industry as to how we work with government to make sure that how our industry is ready to support? Are there big messages that we need to pick up, or do you think we've already dealt with that across different paths? John?
Well, the big message is that we're part of the solution when we get into the recovery. We were part of the solution in the last recovery. We'll be part of the solution this recovery. And we have the experts that can make sure that the recovery plan is a good plan, one that's going to get the desired results. Because I find in general, broad brush generalization, that most governments that we've been dealing with have good intentions and are generally on the right track, but they don't know the industry like we do. And so that's the real opportunity. Now it's hard to gauge. There's always going to be a few outliers out there. One of the challenges that we're finding is that certainly in Canada, the municipal sector is really being impacted because they don't have transit revenues. They don't, they have parking tickets, things like that. And some of the smaller municipalities are shuttering. So one of the things that, one of the big messages we've been saying is that you could have the best conceived stimulus program, you can have a great program to put infrastructure money on the street. But if the municipalities, which collectively own the majority of public infrastructure assets, if they don't have the capacity to actually apply for the funding programs, if they don't have the capacity to actually procure an engineer or an architect, and they don't have the ability to tender the project, it's going to be a very short-lived recovery. And this is not a problem we had last time. So that's probably a big message we need to get out there, is that it's not just supporting us and our capacity, but the clients that actually spend the money, the clients that actually own the assets, they need support too. They need to retain capacity.
Good. Thank you very much, John. I'm going to go to Chris in a minute. Chris, in your, I think you said Unsung Hero, which are really people who have to deal with issues at the cold face of it. I mean, if we take it to the next level, I mean, how effective has your, what I call your external facing, has been successful in working with the government to make sure that they understand exactly what John said, that, we're the one who is ready, has the capacity to help them to move things forward. Has that been, active in South Africa? Chris? Is Chris on mute? Chris, are you still there? I'm going to move very swiftly and move back to the Andy. With the activity going on in UK, we can see that government is at a point in time, the construction industry was critical and then suddenly no longer critical. Do you feel that the UK, association have been, proactive in engaging? Is the industry working together to have a collective force engagement with government? Andy?
I think from the experience, the UK experience, it's clear that the Consulting Engineers Association, ACEC UK, are definitely involved in the response that's taking place. The industry have set up a task force, and I know that the voice of consultancy is actually being heard there. And that's not just in the UK either. I know that in North America, John's already mentioned the fact that they're directly engaged with government. I know that in Australia, there are meetings taking place at the very highest level. I think it was Henrik himself who said that his organization was going for a meeting with government either before this meeting or after this meeting. And that's been one of the features for me about, the proximity of our industry to opinion formers and government, has actually, I believe, been quite good in this current crisis. And if you want expert viewpoints on how to deal with something like this, notwithstanding the fact that no one's experienced it before, I don't think you can go far wrong if you actually ask engineers and consultants, because at the end of the day, and I'm sure I've met loads of them throughout my working career, and they're calm, they're collective, but they're also, very, very focused about what needs to be done. And I think we can, provide a lot of help to the governmental sector during the course of this current crisis.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Henrik now. Henrik, I know that the politician loves figures and statistics. We are all bombarded by figures and statistics on the headline of COVID-19. Some of them are pretty depressing, to be honest. When you look at, the number of people infected all over the world, which country is lagging and where they are on this, and the issue about the R factor. The question I was going to put across with the survey that you've been able to do, Henrik, did you find that the politicians were able to use that and listen to that to guide them in their policy-making process? Henrik?
Thank you for the question, Nelson. I actually, in this circumstance, find that the politicians are more interested in the figures if they are reliable, if they seem trustworthy. I'll actually just take one example. I know we weren't supposed to use PowerPoints, but we made this State of the Nation report in March. Didn't plan for the COVID-19 crisis, so it got a different launch than we had thought about. But one of the figures we come up with is that there is a need to spend 30 billion Danish kroner. We divide that by 7.5, then you get the current in euros, in some of the public housing in order to bring it up to speed. And what we saw just a week and a half ago was then that the government came out and said, we will put in 30 billion Danish kroner in order to invest in refurbishing public housing. And that's actually a figure that's slightly higher than than what was in the project pipeline and so on, but it is a figure that we had given to government. And I think you get this sort of, you get this level of trust built on the history that you have. And then if you have the figures and you can show the trends and you can show that there are actions that will help benefit not the industry direct, well, it will benefit the consultancy and engineering industry, but really it is also to just lift that broader societal perspective.
Okay, thank you very much on that. I'm going to pick up a few questions from the floor now. I think we've got roughly about 5-10 minutes to go. One question says here is that in a small countries where information is not the best to be shared by government, how do you actually engage government to have a consistent and reliable message? So I'm going to put this to the floor. Perhaps, should I start off by saying, Gina, you are the expert in the field and the external person. How do you engage government in a country where traditionally it's not in their best interest to actually be open and transparent, but you have the pandemic and you have the issue about health and safety of people and also keeping the industry? What would your advice be to our industry where those countries are suffering from that lack of transparency?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, but I do have a lot of experience working in emerging democracies and markets around the world on this one. And the short answer maybe not be the one that everybody wants to hear, but it's to have relationships that you trust early on. Okay. So that's tricky when you've got a crisis and then we're 60 days or so into it now, and you're thinking, who do we know that we can get the ear of and we can try to have a real conversation? You have to be real, you have to do some real, I mean, I've done a lot of government lobbying and affairs in addition to the communications work that I've done. So from a strategic point of view, you honestly have to get as much stakeholder architecture down solid. And if you're going to go and just give a presentation and you expect someone who's the department head to receive that information and actually act on it, you're probably wasting your time, to be quite honest. And I know that's not it's a very frank thing to say. But if you do find people within the government, or better yet, often it's the admin people who are supporting the elected politicians who can become real advocates for your point of view, because those civil servants, many of them have been in the trenches for a long time. They actually want to make a difference better for their country, and they will help you move things along. But I would say certainly to try to look at any communication like that, Nelson, and to the question asker, try to make it, think of it as a campaign, and try to get as many stakeholders in alliance around it to try to position some positive messaging about it. If you can get a government official to see this as a win for their own legacy, that might be a positive too. But look at these things like campaigns. Don't expect just the information to be enough to move it along. Also, to Andy, if you can partner with some independent media outlet to help give some bandwidth to your situation, that also can help position and propel a politician.
Thank you very much, Gina. There's a question here, which I think I'm going to put it to Sara. And I think he is very direct. It goes on to say, how do you communicate the real losses incurred on a project by a contractor as a result of the crisis to client who is also worried about his losses without causing offense? How do you deal with that? And this is classic, where you are having challenges, your team having challenge. You talk about following people and keeping in touch with them and keeping the morale. And Gina talked about absolutely fantastic. But against that background, you're trying to keep your business going. And then you have to let the client know that we have challenges, but they themselves have challenges. How do you deal with that? You know?
Well, I think it comes back to Gina's point. It's all about relationships. And, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but often in a crisis, you wish that you'd work those relationships just a little bit better. Because actually, when you are in a situation like this, it's really quite hard to forge those relationships. I think there are some fantastic examples of how things like this sort of technology is helping people bond. But it does come down to open and honest dialogue. It also comes down to rigor. You know, just because we're in a crisis, it doesn't mean to say that you don't keep the same records and data, because all of those things are going to help you at the end of the day. And I think, you know, that's what it's about. It's about having an open conversation with your clients. It's about making sure that they hear the information from you first. So, you know, one of the things we did, as a quoted organization, we had to put a stock market statement out, giving the stock market an update on, you know, what we thought the impact of COVID would be on the organization, which was pretty hard to do. But actually, we didn't want our clients to read about that in the press first. So, you know, we also had communications ready. The minute that went out, we had people phoning our clients, we had letters going out to our clients, just to make sure that you're managing that relationship. But it's about an open dialogue. And if my commercial team were here, they would say it's about record keeping as well. You know, you do have to be really precise about, you know, your variations, your conversations, your work hours. You know, that doesn't disappear just because we're in a crisis. If anything, it's more important.
Sara, you're absolutely right. We had a session on alternative dispute resolution. I think it was record. And that is part of the communication. I'm going to bring John. John, you seem to have a view on the subject.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone what we heard from Gina and from Sara. In fact, what we've heard from everyone over the past hour and change are not unique to pandemics. What it is the pandemic has emphasized how important a sound communication strategy is. These are all things, I mean, Gina's quite right. You know, once we're into the middle of a crisis, it's very hard to cultivate a hero. You know, these are all good principles and what we want to make sure we do, and this will pass. And the world will be a little different. The world will be a little bit the same. It's, you know, remember after 9/11, no one was going to fly and everyone was going to move out of cities. What actually happened, we returned to some normal with a few improvements. And I think that's what's going to happen here. But this really demonstrates why you need to actually have a communications plan. This is just really underscoring that point.
John, you know, you've addressed the question. The question on the floor, it says, what's different between 2008 financial meltdown and the pandemic? I think you just addressed that. Have a communication plan, then tweak it to there. Now, I'm going to bring Bill in because we are coming towards the end of the program. And I just wonder whether Bill, you know, has got any comment to pick up on this, Bill?
Yeah, thanks very much to the speakers and for the questions. The thing that there's all sorts of things to get out of this webinar, but one of the ones is right at the end that rang true to me is the importance of relationships. It's difficult to build them during a crisis, but it's very clear how important they are when you're trying to deal with very difficult things, particularly the damage caused by projects being delayed, etc. So when we come out of this, I think all of us are going to be focusing more and more at how we use communication and leadership and honesty and integrity and all of those core values to build quality relationships. And FIDIC is often referred to the philosophy of engineers, professional engineers, being trusted advisors to our clients. And that is another way of saying that we need quality relationships. So that's sort of the highlight I would mention, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks for that. I'm going to go around the panel now, as I've always planned. You know, we've got 2-3 minutes to wrap up. I'm going to start with Henrik to say, going forward, knowing what we've already covered and the key message that's already been picked up here, you know, yes, communication is important, you know, package it, segment it, target it, know when you put it in. What advice would you give for FIDIC in terms of what else we need to do going forward? Because we are now going to move from, are we in trouble, to knowing we are coming out of it and there will be a new chapter. And it's not about going back to business as usual. It will be a new normal. But what is the new normal? What message we want to give across? One sentence. Henrik? Can you unmute, Eric? We can't hear you.
Yeah, good. I'm unmuted. Thank you. That's a good question. I think one thing to take forward is really the use of digital technology in communications like we do right now, particularly for a global organization as FIDIC. I think we can use that. The seminars so far have been very useful. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. Sara, you know, PLC, no PLC. I think you've said it, be human. What is the message for you?
I think organizations like FIDIC, you know, are invaluable at helping to create and explain the value that our sector does add to society and economy. So more, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go, John.
Well, whether it's advocacy or support of members in their business practice, our members are making business decisions, whether they're firms or member associations. And it's very important, and this is what communication is all about. It's about getting the right information out there so people can make informed decisions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Chris. What's your take on it? Chris, are you still there, or have we lost Chris altogether? I think Chris is gone offline. You can show, just like Andy, we need to be careful about technology. Gina, your comments, please, your advice.
Hi, thanks, Nelson. I would leave you all with the idea that everyone's been saying and capsulize it, that communication strategies and skills are not soft skills. They are the critical skills no matter what industry, and now especially with the ability to learn online and digital transformation being so important for anyone who is interested. I've been given an opportunity to share that just yesterday, in fact, I did launch my leadership communications platform called The Language of Leadership. It's languageofleadership.org. It's a low individual price, so if you're interested, please, you're welcome. And anyone who's interested in communicating back with me, I'm happy to support. That's my heart, helping people communicate better, no matter what industry. Thanks so much, Nelson.
Well, thank you very much, Gina. Hopefully, we were going to have you in our conference this year to be the MC. Hopefully, the COVID-19 will not be COVID-20, so which means we can hold a real conference next year, and we're delighted to try and bring you involved with that. Thank you very much. Andy, what's your take? Any advice?
I just think that, you know, a number of people have used this phrase, the new normal, during the course of today's webinar. And actually, the thing to remember are two words. One is normal and one is new. And I think the key thing with all of this is it will be new. And I actually think things will change a little bit more than maybe what we've been used to in the past. And I think it'll be those organizations and companies that actually adapt to that in the right way, and they're able to communicate through all of that and take people with them that will be successful in that new normal. So new and normal, but it's going to be change. Things are going to change.
Thank you very much, Andy. I mean, this now brings me the time to try and wrap up. First of all, I would probably want to say massive thank you to all you panel speakers for taking the time to join us. Gina, John, Sara, Henrik, and also, you know, Chris. I'm not quite sure what happened to Chris there, but hopefully we try and get him back. And more important, to our president, who continuously surprised me, getting up early in the morning all the time. This is the 11th program. He's never missed any of it. He's been at the beginning and at the end. Also, massive thank you to my staff who's been behind the scene, Barbara. You'll have communication from Barbara, and she's really making sure that we do everything on time and to quality. So fantastic, contribution from both of them. Let me just try and sum it up. We can be in any profession, we can be in any sector, we can be in any industry. What we are facing as pandemic is something that we all pray that we don't have to go through it in our life. Any organization, be it a trade association, a federation like FIDIC, or a PLC, such as Sara outlined, they are there to actually make sure that whatever they do communicate with their stakeholder. And I use the word stakeholder in the widest context. The stakeholder in this case, whether you're a trade association, is about your members. If it's to do within a company, it's about your staff, it's about your client, it's about your investors, and it comes to, and we need to make sure that we have appropriate message that goes across. Now, we can use different buzzwords, whether it's aim or different agenda, but actually the point that was, said by Sarah, I really liked about, being structured, being sort of innovative, agile, and, being in time. I think that really put things together. And I just want to finish up and say, look, yes, we are moving from the old world into new world. Not too long ago, we talked about going digital. Not too long ago, we talked about, the virtual world. But now communication is here, whether it's social media or any means. And the fear that actually in the old generation is that, is this going to be the new normal? Yes, the new normal is. And I pick up that one that Sarah said, traditionally you are controlled. You said, you can't do this, you can't do that. You need to go through security check and balance before you do it. And I say, embrace change. Some people talk about change, they don't want change. So communication is very critical in whatever business, whatever sector you are in. And I just want to finish up. We've looked at all the challenges so far. On Thursday or Wednesday this week, we'll be looking at kickstarting the economy, because as John and everybody talked about, different parts of the world are in different timeline, but somehow, and I thank God for that, we are all coming out of it. What does this mean? What lesson can we learn as an organization, as an industry, as a sector? What lesson can we take into the next chapter to help us through? So for those who've been following us, please be aware, it is not Thursday this time, it's going to be on Wednesday. And be ready to join us. And I just want to thank everybody who's participated in this program. Say thank you very much. Keep safe wherever you are. God bless you. Thank you.